Snow falls in Yucaipa town tonight. City lights glow, oh what a sight. Santa's sleigh glides down Main Street. Community plans make Christmas sweet. City managers making spirits bright. From Yucaipa to Calimesa light. With the American Association by our side, we keep the cities full of pride. Oh, 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 oh. The Yucaipa tell its pride.
Welcome to episode number 8 of Yucaipa 360. We're excited to have two guests with us here today who have distinguished careers in the city management profession. Joe Turner, who is a bit of a celebrity in the city management world. Joe's been a city manager, but is also the founder of the American Association of Municipal Executives. And he is the host of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, which by many accounts is the most popular local government podcast in America. Joe, it is an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, bud. Nice to see you, Chris. For those who don't know, we go back quite a ways. We probably know each other for, I don't know, close to 15 years or so.
Yeah,
15 years or more.
Probably about that. Yeah, absolutely. And Will Kolbow is the city manager of our neighboring city, Calimesa. Will has worked in local government for about 17 years and has an accounting and finance background. Will's been managing Calimesa for the last 2 years, where he also hosts the Calimesa Insider podcast. Prior to that, he spent about 8.5 years with the city of Orange as assistant city manager, administrative services director, and finance director. Welcome, Will.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad to be in the presence of two great individuals here in the city manager profession.
Well, I don't know about great, but thank you. Thank you.
I don't know about celebrity either, but thank you. Yeah.
Well, look, I really want to dive in today on both of your backgrounds and all of our very different paths to the city management profession. But first, let's define for those who are watching and listening who may not be aware what a city manager is, right? I mean, what role does a city manager play within municipal government? I think a good place to start is maybe to talk about the council manager form of government, right? Which is the most common form of government in California. Over 90% of California's 483 cities use the council manager form of government. And, basically it is the idea, the method by which the public elects a legislative body, in this case, a city council. The city council then appoints a professional city manager, an executive to run the day-to-day operations of the city and to execute the policy directives set by the city council. Did I nail that? Is that about it?
I think you got it, sir.
I think so, yeah.
All right.
I would say, the cliche or the sort of maybe worn out explanation is to kind of take that a little step further for the average person to understand is that we are essentially the chief executive officer of a municipal corporation, right?
Correct.
Cities are municipal corporations, and the council is like the board of directors who oversees the CEO. And I think a lot of folks don't really fully understand, and I blame that on the title itself. I'm not a fan of the city manager title. I think we should probably work as a profession to change that to something more along the lines of a MCEO, municipal CEO, or something along that lines, because I think the average person doesn't really fully understand that the city manager / CEO is involved in running the entire organization and is accountable for the entire organization, at least to the council, right?
Correct.
You work for the council, not for the citizen per se.
Right.
And so I think that's something that most folks don't really fully comprehend, because I think the city manager title is a little bit, I think it undervalues or devalues the profession, to be honest.
No, that's a great point. And a good analogy is a corporation. I mean, as you mentioned, cities are municipal corporations. When you become a city that is called incorporation, you're incorporating, you're becoming a municipal corporation. But when we think of corporations, we think of, a board of directors and then a CEO. It's the same thing. The municipal corporation, the board of directors is the city council, and the city council hires the city manager, who is the CEO of the corporation. A lot of counties have gone to the CEO title. Used to be county administrator, right?
Yes.
And a lot of counties have gone to to county CEO, and it's
I think
probably,
San Bernardino County was one of the early ones to do that under Greg Devereaux because when he came, it was a CAO title, and then he became the CEO.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's correct, and it's a growing trend. And I have not yet seen it catch on with cities, but probably a matter of time.
Yeah, and I don't want to step on Will here, but you know, when you look at the kind of the business analogy, there's some dividing line. Like, you know, people say, oh, we should, you know, treat government more like a business or run government more like a business. And there a lot of folks in our profession actually push back against that. I won't get into that here for the sake of this conversation. But when I talk to governing bodies when I'm applying for a position or when I'm hired, and I talk to them, you know, I talk about my experience in business school and about how, you know, the number one job of the CEO or in a business is to provide or return value to the shareholders.
Right.
And I look at my role as a city manager, city administrator, what have you. They're interchangeable, with some nuances for the listener. Is that my job is to return value to the taxpayer shareholders, and that's I take that very seriously because that's for my private sector business kind of school background into the equation.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to me because you're right. The purpose of municipal government is to provide services for a community, right? But I think there's an interesting distinction with the city manager role. A lot of people in the community and in all communities feel like the city manager works for the community. I'm sure each of us have at one time or another been told by a resident, you work for me.
I pay your salary.
I pay your salary.
Yes, that's right.
But in fact, the city manager does not work for the community.
Correct.
Right. The city manager works for the city council, who is the board of directors of the municipal corporation. Right.
Yeah, and they work for the community.
And they work for the community.
Yes.
Right. Very often, you know, people say, well, you know, how could you make this decision without, you know, getting input from, you know, without being told basically by the public what we want? And my response is, when I speak to the city council, I am speaking to the public. We have a representative form of government.
That's
right. They are the embodiment of the public. They are elected by the public to come study issues, understand issues, and make decisions with that full understanding that they believe are in the best interest of the community. Right. We don't have a direct democracy here.
Correct.
Right. Where every issue we're gonna take it to a vote or a poll and make the decision based on that. Right. And
Well,
so,
you think that things are bureaucratic now. Just imagine if you did that for
Right.
every decision you had to make, right? I mean, it would add so much more time, and then who's engaged, who's not. Yeah, that opens a whole other can of worms. So
yeah, no,
Yeah.
It sure does. Sure does. Interesting profession, city management. You know, there are a lot of parallels with the private sector and private corporations, but there are a lot of places where that analogy breaks down, right? And one of the big areas that is not the same is, you know, the interaction with the public and dealing with the public, and, you know, you have a board of directors that faces election every couple of years. You have, you know, a changeover on your city council, and, you know, dealing with the very public nature of local government and the personal tax. And I'm sure we're going to talk
The level
about
of scrutiny. I mean, the level of scrutiny, lack of anonymity. I mean, it's not very often you read about the personal foibles or things going on with a CEO, for example, right? It has to be a pretty high level news making situation. But, you know, almost anything what you had for breakfast as a city manager could almost be on the next day's social media page. It can be pretty difficult.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. Well, Joe, you and I have had what I would consider to be pretty unconventional paths to the city management profession. And Will, I would say that you've had more of a conventional path to the city management profession. I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit because I find it interesting how people come into this profession. I think a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, who is a city manager? How does one become a city manager? And I think that's something that has changed in the profession over recent years, because I think it used to be really there was almost only the traditional path. As the profession has changed, I see more and more people coming into city management from different backgrounds than we used to see. So, Joe, let's start with you. You were kind of a local guy starting out, Southern California guy. Got your undergrad at USC in business and business admin and finance. Master's in public administration at Cal State San Bernardino, and you got your start on the political side of the equation.
Yeah.
You know, you were a field rep for a member of the state assembly, communications and special projects for the board of supervisors in San Bernardino County. Did quite a bit of political consulting and political work. through that, you kind of gained a little bit of a reputation as an activist.
That's been very mild,
Right?
I think. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and with that comes some controversy.
It does.
Right?
It
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, in your case, your political activity in many cases was focused on kind of one particular area of policy that was very controversial,
Hmm.
right? How did you find your path from that to the government side? Because you and I have known each other for a long time. We both dabbled in the political side of things earlier on in our careers. I lost track of you for a few years.
Yeah, I fell off the
Yeah.
I fell off the grid.
You did.
Yeah.
And then about 2018, all of a sudden, out of nowhere,
we're going back to that.
seemingly, right? 2018, you popped up in the middle of the country in Kansas, and you're working in government.
Yeah.
You're public works for the city of Goddard, Kansas. How did that happen? How did you find your way from the political side to the government employees?
Oh man, this is an interesting conversation to have for a city podcast here. I don't know how much I should get into, Chris. You know, I was a political animal at one point, an activist.
We often tell people we can edit anything
That's
out,
right.
and then we never do.
That's
So
right.
it's-
The editor forgets, right? Oops. You know, let me back up to the big picture.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think that'll be probably the best way to explain it. Is I've always been an idealistic person who thinks that one person can truly make a difference. And so that's how I got involved in activism and became really effective and really controversial in some circles and made a name for myself. And over time, I became very jaded about the political process. And for the listeners who are since mostly, city Yucaipa, I'm an IE kid. I grew up in Riverside, San Bernardino, graduated from high school at North and Riverside, went to school in San Bernardino as a kid. Went to school in Redlands for a little bit. Used to stomp around in Yucaipa and Calimesa as raising hell as a youngster a little bit. So I got involved in the politics because I wanted to make a difference. And I didn't really feel like I was making much of a difference.
Right. Yeah.
And, and then and with the changing demographics and politics of the state of California, I was no country for old men for me. And so during my work for a county supervisor, San Bernardino County Supervisor, I acquired my master's degree from Cal State San Bernardino, and I had wanted to pursue the city manager track at that time. But the doors weren't open for me for any conventional, traditional approach in the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
Fell off the grid, left the scene for a while, and then I relocated out to Kansas to kind of get back into it. And then one thing led to another, and that's kind of how we got here today. But at the end of the day, if I'm being very candid, is I'm right of center politically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a very staunch belief in limited government, effective, efficient government. And I used to be a bomb thrower in that regard and be very critical. And so sometimes I even feel like a hypocrite today because, and maybe we'll unpack some of that. I don't know. Because I've been very critical of government in my past life, local government and just government bureaucracy and so forth and so on. And so I wanted to be the change I want to see in the world. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and try to be a city manager and see if I can make things better or improve on the model. And that's kind of how we got here today. That was too long of an answer. I don't know, but
that's good. I mean, I'd like to delve a little bit more into that. So in 2018, you go to work as a public works director. The following year, you get your first shot at.
Well, I got fired. If I'll be very candid, I got
I
fired.
wasn't going to bring
I know.
that up.
I have no problem bringing it up. I got my hat handed to me about 10 months in, and I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do now? I just bought a house, and I was in some it was some dark days there for a few weeks, and then I was able to land my first city administrator gig. So in Kansas, most of the city managers are called city administrators. There's some nuances I won't get into the sake of this for this broadcast or podcast, but landed my gig there and started in a very small town outside of Wichita, Kansas, and the rest is history. It's been getting fired literally was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Oh, isn't that something? Definitely an occupational hazard. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute.
You know what they say: if you haven't gotten fired, you're not doing it right.
Oh well, matter of time for me, I'm sure. A lot of our listeners and viewers are praying for that very thing. So, So you get your first shot, a town called Sedgwick
Yep.
in Kansas, city administrator. You had set this as a career goal for you.
Town of 1,700.
1,700.
Yeah, my
is
high
that
school
right?
was larger, had a larger population than.
It's funny. My first city manager job was the city of Canyon Lake in Riverside County, city of 11,000 people. And like a lot of small cities, there's a little bit of a complex that comes with that. And I remember my first conference as a city manager in 2019 was actually an ICMA conference. I believe it was in Nashville that year, if I'm remembering correctly. One of the sessions they had was for new city managers. And we were sitting at round tables, and it was all city managers that were within their first year of becoming a city manager. And towards the end of that session, they said, "Okay, we want you to talk amongst yourselves, amongst your table, introduce yourself, tell about the city you're in, how what your experience has been entering the profession." And so we went around the table, and everyone introduced themselves, said what city they were working in, and what the population was, and some of the major issues. I was the first to go. So I said, "Well, I'm Chris Mann. I'm the city of Canyon Lake. I was just appointed, and I'm a very, very small city in Riverside County." Someone said, "Well, what's your population?" I said 11,000. I said, "Well, we're like 1,500." And one by one, it turns out I was the largest city at the table. I think we have a disproportionate view of things in Southern California, where we're used to these very large cities, but in a lot of parts of the country, even in other areas of California, that's just not the case.
Oh, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, Will, but I will say, yes, moving to Kansas was a shock. I think Kansas population might be just slightly, as a state, slightly greater than San Bernardino County, most of the cities, and I think, literally more than half the cities in Kansas are like under 500 people in population.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's
Wow.
mind-boggling.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 10th most populous city, I think, has like 40,000 people.
Wow.
And yeah, so I experienced this, I told you before we had lunch earlier, and I was like, my first job, the city of Sedgwick as a city administrator, I was like, oh, we only have 2 police officers. We don't have 24/7 police coverage. Like, no, we don't have 24/7 here. We can't afford that. What are we talking about?
Wow. Different world.
It sure is.
Different world. Yeah. The provision of public services is such a big business here in California now. That's probably a whole nother,
especially with the
podcast
unions and
episode. Yeah. But it is not done this way everywhere in the country. And it provides, a very high level of service here, but also some fiscal challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as well. So first job you landed, how did you find walking in? So small community, but now you're the top guy. Was it what you thought it would be?
Oh man, if I'm being honest, I was scared.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be very, I was like, oh, am I in over my head here? Like, this is a big, I don't think, a lot of people want to be a city manager. Like, no one grows up saying, I want to be a city manager, first of all. No one even really knows what it is. But, when you get into this line of work, a lot of folks have the end goal of wanting to be a city manager. And I was like, oh, I really want to be a city manager. And then I get into the chair, and granted, it's only, 1,700 people or whatnot, small town. But the gravity of knowing that every decision you rest on your shoulders as far as you're accountable and that's a heavy, if you're talking about dealing with, responding to natural disasters or responding to inclement weather or all the things that go with it. And then, shortly after I get hired, about 6 months later, we're dealing with COVID, which was a whole other story, right? We don't need to go on that, but just the gravity of the situation. I didn't know anybody in Kansas. I didn't have family. I didn't have friends out there. I didn't know how Kansas government works. I had never done a budget out there. A big learning curve. But it was the most gratifying and fulfilling experience ever. I loved it.
Okay. So you worked as a city administrator in Sedgwick, then in South Hutchinson, Kansas.
Yeah, I bounced after 2 years. I made it very clear it's a stepping stone job for me. No offense, they were understood. I was in my early 40s making a mid-career change, so I was like, I don't have time to mess around here in a town of 1,700. Making the salary they're paying me. And so it was a stepping stone. Then went to the next step and was there for a little bit, and a similar deal.
Yeah. And you were up in Florida for a while.
Oh man, let's not even talk about Florida. That was an absolute disaster.
Was it really? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Florida's a whole different animal.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, one of the main things I want to talk about today too is in May of 2023, so about a year and a half ago, you were in Wichita, Kansas at this point, living, right?
Yep.
You launched the City Manager Unfiltered podcast.
Yeah.
Which has, you like to say on the podcast, the most popular local government podcast.
Most influential.
Influential.
local government podcast.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So humble of me.
Yeah. But I don't think you're wrong. I don't think that's just a tagline.
No, I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. There's things that I can't really say on this podcast, but it moves the needle.
It does.
We
go to conferences throughout the year, and it's a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
Your name is everywhere in the profession. The topics that you cover are talked about.
I talk to my staff about sometimes when there's relevant topics for them to listen to. I encourage them to check it out too.
As do I. Yeah, as do I. How did that come about? What was the genesis of the podcast?
Very organically. So I started posting on LinkedIn, had no desire to really even be an influencer or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Started posting just sharing stories that I thought were interesting. Trying to maybe
about local
government exclusively. Okay. I had 100 followers on LinkedIn. And then in short order, it just grew. People were responding. And then people said, hey, you should start a podcast. And I was like, no. And then he's like, oh, you should do a podcast. I'm like, no. And then well, maybe I should do a podcast, and so then that's how that happened, very organically.
Interesting. And man, it took off.
It did. It's been very fun. It's a grind you're doing this now, right?
Yeah.
And I do it every week, and it's more low tech than this because it's just audio only. But, just navigating the challenges logistically of getting a guest and coordinating that, and then the editing, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
Oh, I bet.
But it's opened a lot of doors that I would never have. And I would encourage I do think that in our profession, most city managers are a little bit too reticent to put themselves out there and develop a voice or a platform. And, the reality is, even though I hate the expression of influencer or personal brand, we all have a personal brand, whether we want to admit it or not. It's either the one we're cultivating or just sort of what we have by default. And if we're, on the, a wallflower, you have a brand, right?
Right.
So,
right. No, that's very true. So you're doing this podcast, you're about a year into it, and we get to May of last year. And I think, and this is my perception from the outside, so I'd love for you to correct me if my perception here is wrong, but because of some of the topics you were covering on the podcast, it became clear and evident to a lot of people in the profession that there was a need for an organization a national organization that really supported city managers, right? Not just set standards for the profession, protected the profession, right? But was on the side of the city manager.
Yeah.
And so a little over a year into doing the podcast, you and a couple others started a new organization called the American Association of Municipal Executives. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the ICMA exists, and they primarily exist for the function.
And ICMA
is the International City County Management Association.
Right.
And they primarily exist for the purpose of supporting the council manager form of government. Every time over the year or so that I was posting on LinkedIn, I would criticize the ICMA for not going to bat for city managers who were getting fired by, councils that were violating the law or behaving unethically, unprofessionally, all these things. I was constantly reminded by the people who were ICMA members or ICMA supporters that the ICMA was not constructed or did not exist to serve as an advocate for the manager. They're not a union for the manager. They're not an advocate for the manager. They're not agents for the manager. And my position was, well, if they're not, who is? And so I tried repeatedly I was posting twice a day on LinkedIn. That's how I was pretty aggressive about it. I'm trying for a year plus to communicate the importance for an advocacy component for city managers and something that's going to support the city managers. And nobody would step up and answer the bell. The ICMA showed no desire to modify or change its approach. And so I said, well, if no one's going to do it, I've been talking about this now for 2 years, literally at this point, over 2 years. So it's like, someone's got to do it, and that's basically was the genesis for it.
Okay. Yeah. I want to come back to that because I want to dive in a little bit more in a minute into AAME and the work the concepts behind it and the work that's being done and will be done through that organization. But let's switch. Will, I want to talk about your background a little bit because very different path, very different approach, right?
Yep.
You also have local Southern California roots, graduate of Cal State Fullerton, bachelor's in business administration and accounting, master's in public administration from Cal State Dominguez Hills. Got your start doing accounting work
Yes.
in the private sector, but for firms that were auditing local government, right?
Correct,
Tiemann,
yes.
Rivers and Smith, which is a large, well-known firm in Riverside.
Mhm.
I know Rich Tiemann pretty well. We've worked together in the past. Charles Fedak, did I pronounce that correctly?
FEDAC, yeah.
FEDAC,
They're very, very small firm. Very
okay.
small, yes.
So you were familiar with local government because you were auditing the books of local government.
Right.
But in 2006, you made the switch over to the local government side, working for Cucamonga Valley Water District as an accounting officer, and then the finance officer.
Right.
Why the switch over?
So let me back up a bit. So
Yeah.
I had no qualms about getting into local government in terms of auditing and things like that. So, as I was starting to I was getting close to graduation with my bachelor's, I was looking at different firms to go, go to work for. And the firm that when Tiemann, Ramirez and Smith actually hired me, that was just happened about what they did. So I kind of fell into it backwards a little bit. My second day, I will never forget, was my first day. I graduated on a Saturday. I got my orientation on a Monday. I was at my first client on a Tuesday, the city of Dana Point.
Wow.
And so that was my first exposure.
On site? You were on site the next day?
Yeah. My second day. I was 3 days removed from college graduation. So jumped right into it. And
normally when an auditor arrives, everyone's a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
That day, who was more nervous?
Oh, it was me for 100%. 100% it was me. And I should have been too, because I think when they reviewed the work papers, that's what the manager has to do. I had like 70 comments or something like that. I'm like, oh, I called my wife. I'm going to get fired. This is terrible. So it was quite an adventure, but it became quickly apparent to me that I didn't want to do auditing. That was just not going to be my thing. I was always good with numbers, which is why I went into accounting, but auditing was not my thing. It wasn't that I was a bad auditor or anything. I just didn't, it just wasn't my thing.
Didn't move you.
Yeah. So, but I did notice though that a lot of the clients I visited seemed to enjoy what they were doing. So I kind of decided I want to get on that side. So started looking around, and I found the job opening at Cucamonga Valley and went to work there. And it was a great move. One of the people that influenced my career early on there was Carrie Corder, who was their CFO at the time. And so she kind of, really helped me get acclimated to that side of the equation and everything. And I just kind of went from there. And so that was what kind of drove that change for me.
Okay. So you're there for about 6 years or so, and then moved over to the city of San Bernardino Water Department.
Water Department.
As
That's a very important distinction. Because it was, I think, October of 2012.
This is a safe space. We're among friends. It's just the three of us. What do you mean? Why do you got to do San Bernardino like that?
Well, there's that little bankruptcy thing like 3 months before. That's just a little wrinkle.
Yeah.
That was an interesting change for me. But going to the water department, obviously, the general manager really wanted to keep us kind of separated. And the way that San Bernardino is structured is that the water department very much is run kind of like its own enterprise. Yeah. Because it's got its own general manager who reports to a board of water commissioners. The water commissioners are then appointed by the mayor. So, and they all serve 6-year terms. So there's a lot of independence from the governing body of the city council. So, and obviously with a lot of the issues they were facing with their city council at the time, that was probably a really good thing. And so the people that were on the water board had been was a former police chief, a former city council member. So really, people in distinguished careers. So it was quite an adventure. But trying to navigate and keep the water department protected from the bankruptcy proceedings was really important. As a matter of fact, one of my main goals was to separate the cash from the city government, and that was. They actually went to the bankruptcy judge, to make sure that was kosher, because the city wanted to have access to those funds. And they said, no, this is separate. This is legally separate money. So, because to me, it was about protecting the ratepayers, right? I wanted to make sure that that their interests were protected, even though, yes, they're residents of the city,
which
as well.
are separate and distinct from the taxpayers.
Correct.
I think a lot of people kind of confuse that, because I think a lot of people confuse water or blend them together. They're different.
They're different. Yeah, that's right. So, and that was important for me, and that was important for the water department. So it was successful. You learn a lot being in that in that environment, and it's like dog years. So I was only there for there for less than 2 years, but
Yeah.
It definitely ages you and it matures you for sure.
Like all talented local government professionals, you fled the city of San Bernardino relatively.
San Bernardino
shortly.
never leaves you.
Yeah,
Just so you know. San Bernardino
Still got the
carries
scars. I still got the scars.
and you went to the city of Orange.
I did.
Yeah. Why the change to the city side now? I mean, you were kind of municipal water, though it's different. And then you decided to make the move over to city government directly.
My wife kind of influenced that. I went a little bit in that. Well, number one, she didn't like me driving into San Bernardino every day, so there was that. But really,
for San Bernardino.
I know. I'm sorry to bash in San Bernardino City.
Hey, I live there, so
but,
I know.
You know.
You don't need to apologize to me, brother.
But but mainly it was, I had been concentrating in the water side of things for 8 years, and I was getting a little bored with it, to be honest with you, and I wanted to have a kind of a more broader perspective. And so City of Orange is a full service city. It had its own water department, so I did bring that experience, but they police, fire, library, they had it all. So it was a pretty big leap for me. And so that was the reason I went to Orange, is I wanted to get that full spectrum of municipal government, because by then now I'm kind of more into it. I backed into it, but once I was in.
Right.
So
right.
yeah.
So during your time in the city of Orange, then you started working your way up the ladder. You came in as finance director. You were promoted to administrative services director, which, for those who don't know, administrative services director, and in some cities, particularly slightly larger cities, that position is over a number of different departments.
Right.
And then you got the shot as assistant city manager from there.
Right.
You came to Calimesa in 2022 as city manager. How did that happen? At what point in your career did you decide that being a city manager was a career goal of yours? And how did it come to be that you came to Calimesa?
Well, I think probably about halfway into my tenure, I realized that's the direction I wanted to go. So when I started working in Orange, the city manager at the time was a gentleman by the name of John Sibley. He retired about 9 months into my tenure. The ACM there, the assistant city manager, Rick Otto, was promoted to city manager. And he really became my mentor. And he was probably a big reason why I wanted to become a city manager. Just his management style and his attention to culture. He approached customer service in government with he said, I want to be the Nordstrom of cities in terms of customer service, in terms of the quality of service that we provide. So that always kind of stuck with me. And just through his leadership and mentorship, it made me think, number one, this is something I could do, and number two, something I want to do. So 2022 comes around, and actually, Rick Otto retired from the city of Orange, and a lot of people in the organization thought I was going to be promoted to be the city manager. And I was not. And I was okay with that. I understood. And, one of the things people have to understand is that the council changed pretty dramatically. So they had a 5-member at-large council, and they went to a 7-member by district council.
Interesting.
And it was a result of a California Voter Right Act lawsuit. And that did change the dynamics of the council quite a bit. And so I think that with that change, they wanted to bring somebody in from the outside. And so that was kind of the goal. So I get that, and I understood it, but I still had that goal. But I started to realize that probably wasn't going to happen here. So,
and step on you though too. Yeah. It probably wouldn't have been the best recipe for success for you, anyways.
Correct.
First gig in that spot. So
yeah, actually, it's funny. It's great that you say that, because when I was at the League of California Cities conference recently, I ran into one of the former one of the council members there. And I said it probably was best that you didn't hire me. And so it actually worked out better for me. And I think it worked out better for the city as well. So, that's a great point. So, Calimesa rolls around, and I actually, full disclosure, I live in the city of Eastvale. So I don't live here in this area, but I still live in Riverside County. And I think that there's a lot of pros and cons. I know Joe, you talk a lot about residency requirements and things like that. I know. And I know that you, though, live in the city. So there are certainly pros and cons for the city manager to live there. And I think going back to when you talked about the form of government, that probably is a discussion that can be had. But the bottom line is I was made aware of the opportunity here in Calimesa. I started to research it. And when I research for a position I'm looking for, I go all out. I'm watching council meetings. I'm reading minutes. I'm reading, trying to find as much history as I can. And, I think that, you talk about traditional paths to a city manager position, especially first time city manager position.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just dependent on what the council's looking for at the time. Once you have the city manager title, it probably does make it a lot easier to go to other places.
Without question. Just get the title if you're trying to,
But the initial try is almost sometimes just a little bit of luck of the draw in terms of what the city's looking for. You could probably take the same candidates that I was up against in a different city and someone else gets selected, right? It just happened to be that my predecessor, Bonnie Johnson, was very successful in her position here. She was very well liked by the council. She has a finance background. So they wanted to find somebody else that could continue and run with that torch. And so that was a big advantage for me having a finance background. So I think that's why it was a right fit at the time. And obviously, having branched out from just the finance world, the administrative world, and kind of more in the house type of stuff. Because when I was in Orange, there was 2 ACMs. I kind of looked over the internal administrative side and then the other ACM, because it was a split position. I still had my title of Administrative Services Director, and the other ACM was the Community Services Director. So she was more operations, customer facing. And so, it was trial by fire with a lot of development that we have happening in Calimesa, a lot of capital projects. So, learning and planning and, running a municipal fire department that is a very small municipal fire department is very different, as from Canyon Lake.
Yes.
So it does bring its unique challenges. I had that experience from a much bigger department, and having worked with the Orange City Fire Department, and they're a very old, traditional, been around since 1905. The Calimesa Fire Department around since 2018, very, very different. So learning all those things was definitely challenging, but it's been great. I love what I do here. So I'm very happy to be here.
Quick little sidebar, for our sake, I'll just put out there, I still think that a finance background is probably one of the best backgrounds to have if you want to get into the city management profession. I'm really partial to that. Obviously, my emphasis in college was in finance, but I think if you have that basic understanding of finance and the budget, I just feel like you can't go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
well, you can go wrong.
Well, if you're not good, if you don't know how to do math,
I think where finance people in accounting especially really have a challenge, and why maybe you don't see more of that. It's not that you don't see it at all, but you don't see it as much as you might expect given what Joe had just said. But I think the reason is there's maybe sometimes personality, and there's a lot of that goes into being a city manager as well, and being able to branch out from that. And I think that there's not a lot of people in finance that want to maybe pursue that. It's maybe they don't maybe have the personality to pursue it.
Personality is huge.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's interesting because the more traditional path to the city manager chair is to work your way through an organization or multiple organizations, work your way up, and maybe you're in one department. You start as a planner, then you work you up to a senior planner, maybe you're a planning director, then you're community development director, and then maybe assistant city manager and city manager. And so you may be incredibly technically proficient your entire career, and you reach that city manager chair, and man, it is a different ballgame.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
It is a different skill set.
It's 180 different.
Yeah.
And it's not based on, you're not a technocrat.
No. And all the knowledge you have of, planning, and maybe the organization as a whole, if you've been in that organization for a period of time, is helpful to you. But there's an entirely different side to the job that is foreign to most people until they do it. And
I don't know if I'm out of turn here, but I would say that I think in many respects, the traditional route creates, and not that that's inherently bad or whatnot, but I think oftentimes it creates in a situation where you have a lot of individuals who have siloed off into understanding a specific aspect of the organization. And the reality is when you get to the top post and you're a city manager, you have to have a holistic, comprehensive, three-dimensional, 360-degree understanding to go off into the title of the podcast here, right? Of how the organization works, right? And how it's all interconnected. And not only that, I think what happens too often, as somebody who took the non-traditional route, who used to work for elected officials and what have you, is I do think there is a fundamental lack of understanding often within our colleagues, our peers, when it comes to understanding the political machinations and dynamics at work not only internally within the organization, less so, but more so outside the organization and all the different stakeholder groups and how that can impact the decision-making process.
I would also add, even within the more what we call quote unquote traditional path, there is still, even within that, if you worked in government for a long time, there's still the specialist route versus the generalist route as well, right? So you mentioned what you talked about is more of a specialist route.
Right.
The other one's generalist, the analyst, assistant to the city manager, deputy city manager, and moving up through the city manager's office from the beginning.
Right.
That also, I think, does create some challenges. If you may have that more holistic review of the organization, but you don't have the experience of running a department, and now all of a sudden you have the police chief reporting to you and the fire chief reporting to you, which is a much different dynamic, and not having that operational background and experience also could impact you. So I think that the best path for a generalist would be to try to make a stop in as like a department director. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Before you get into that chair, because that experience is very valuable. And I've seen where it has, kind of tripped up some city managers in the past.
Yeah.
Great point, Will.
When I worked for the County of San Bernardino for the Board of Supervisors, I saw that firsthand where the CEO, his name was Greg Devereaux, had been a very well-known and respected city manager before stepping into the county CEO role, would often do that to people he was eyeing for, leadership in the future. You might have an analyst or someone in the executive office, and he would, there would be a department that needed improvement, and he would send that person to that department. Okay, you're going to be the interim director of that department for the next year or 2 years or whatever it is. Go straighten that department out. And if they did a good job, they'd come back to the executive office and maybe with a higher title, and then they get sent out to a different department. And while they were learning the different departments of the county, it was also a test of their leadership abilities.
Right.
In a larger organization, I think that's a lot easier to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to take this moment. I don't know, not that he's ever going to hear this podcast, or I don't know where Greg's even at nowadays, because I've been out of the state for a while. But man, I'm going to say I owe him an apology. Because
what did you do to Greg, Joe?
I threw some bombs his way.
Did you?
Back in the political side. So yeah, I was. That's where it's kind of a fun, kind of get into like city manager compensation, CEO compensation, because I worked on the legislative political side, so I was an activist. So I was throwing bombs, and I took shots at him and his pay back in the day. So, and it was nothing personal. Obviously, it's just part of the game. But the game kind of sucks when you remove yourself from it. I wish I was never really involved in it. So,
well, we can get him on the line right now.
I can confess. Yeah. He's doing all right, I'm sure. Doesn't need Joe Turner to apologize.
No, he is, and he's someone I have a tremendous amount of respect for.
He was great.
He's
very competent.
I didn't work directly under him. I was on the Board of Supervisors side, but on the same floor, the 5th floor of the county building. I intentionally watched what he did very carefully to glean whatever I could from his management style, and he's been a little bit of a mentor of mine. I
squandered that opportunity. So.
Yeah. Well. That's all right.
15 years ago on the bridge.
15 years ago. But, a lot of what you said, Will, really rings true to me. I think it really often depends on the needs of the organization and of the council at that time. My first city manager job in the city of Canyon Lake, it was just the right place at the right time and the right needs for that city and that council. I had come from a private sector and more political background. I started in local government and politics very young. Right out of college at the age of 23, I ran for city council, lived in the city of Westlake Village in LA County at that time. And, I had been brought in, drawn into local government based on a land use issue that I got passionate about. I was a psychology major at California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks.
Really paying dividends there with that.
Right. Well, sometimes, yeah. I just try not to self-diagnose. But I kind of really fell in love with local government, watching the city that I lived in, and ended up double majoring in political science. And I'd occasionally go to city council meetings and step up to the podium and voice opinions on a land use issue. And there was a group in town that was very vocal on the issue. And the group approached me after a council meeting once and said, "Have you ever thought about running for city council?" And I said, "You realize I'm 23, right?" But the guy I was running against was 84, so it kind of balanced itself out. So I ran not expecting to win, but kind of as a way to jump in and get involved and experience local government firsthand, and as a way to kind of get the word out on the issue that I cared about. And I walked every door. I wasn't smart enough at the time to
Have a list.
have a list and know you're supposed to only go to
High
register
frequency voters.
Right. I didn't know what that was. I went to every door, but I ended up winning by 23 votes. Right. So
Just imagine if you hit the high propensity voters only, you
Oh,
probably would
I
have won
know.
by 230 votes.
but it was a great learning experience. I was 23 on the city council. I was mayor at 26, and I just fell in love with local government, and local government specifically, because to me, while the things that happen in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento are important, local government is so much more tangible,
Yes.
right? It impacts people's daily lives, right? In a very real way. You fix a road, you can see it. You build a park, you see kids there playing in the
The
park.
feedback
and
loop
it's,
is so immediate relative to
for
other
better or
things.
worse.
Yep.
Yes,
Yes, true.
No,
Yeah.
that's true. But I was young, so I went on with my career. I went into public relations. I came out to the Inland Empire to work for O'Reilly Public Relations, which was, and I think still is, the largest PR firm
In the IE.
in the IE, and great experience. This was pre-recession.
Are we allowed to say IE? I've been gone for a while.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
still a thing.
not?
It's
Okay.
still a
I'm-
thing.
I'm- Might really date
You
myself.
can't
here.
say
I
the
don't know.
909 though, because now we have 951 and
Yeah, I
909.
know.
It's,
Right. Yes.
and so it was a great entrance into the Inland Empire and local government out here. 90% of what we did was land use entitlement, and
Great place to be for that with the rapid
it was
growth.
booming
obviously.
in the pre-recession. So, 2005 timeframe, I went off on my own and started my own public relations company, doing a lot of public affairs work, any kind of entitlements or anything you might need from local government. But then took on nonprofit clients as well, and kind of played both sides. We would work for developers on projects. We'd also work for organizations opposing certain projects, which is actually how I got my start in local government, ironically. But through the years in the private sector, I stayed in touch with local government. I served on 2 separate water boards over the years, and maybe 10 or 11 years into running this company, I started feeling a couple things. First of all, I wasn't feeling fulfillment in my career. I existed to make other people money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just felt a lack of meaning, and also just the grind of running your own business all the time and having to keep the pipeline full. And I wanted to start focusing on maybe getting married and having a family one day, and doing something that brought more meaning to my life. So I decided to change career trajectory. I had an opportunity to go work for the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County, and it was there where I remembered my love of local government, and decided that someday I want to be a city manager. And so worked for the board, still did some consulting work, and started applying I didn't think that I'd be able to step right into a city manager job. So I started applying for analyst jobs, assistant city manager jobs.
Yeah, you're kind of that no man's like, what do you do, right? Where do you go? Where do you even start?
Right.
Yeah.
I've worked for the board for, at that point, 3 years, which is, a large organization. San Bernardino County at that time was, $5.4 billion budget. It's much larger now, 22,000 employees. And my first day on the job as an analyst, I was handed a binder this big, and it was the draft county budget, and told, read this, understand it, and be ready to explain it to the supervisor in 2 weeks, So that was a great experience. But I was on the board side, which is, the working for the elected official. I wasn't in the executive office, right?
Right.
I couldn't claim that I had managed that organization, right?
No, and
And
there's a wall there, an invisible wall that's completely different when you're on the political side
Yes.
versus the administrative side.
No, that's very
And
true.
oftentimes the administrative side looks at us with understandable skepticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So in 2019, I got a phone call from someone that I had met a couple of times but didn't have a real close relationship with, a guy named Jeremy Smith, who was on the city council in Canyon Lake, had just gotten elected. This was in January of 2019. He and one other member had been newly elected to that council the previous November. And he was familiar with my work at the county. And he said, listen, what are you, what are you thinking for your future, for your career? And I said, well, I've been applying for analyst jobs, assistant city manager jobs. And he said, well, I'd hoped you'd say that. Funny you say that because I'm on the city council now. We've just not renewed our city manager's contract, and we're going to be looking for a city manager. I think you should apply. Right?
That's always a good call to get.
Yes. But it was a competitive process. It
Sure.
was not it was, I think we had 34, 36 applicants. But like you will, man, I did my due diligence. I researched everything. I came up with, so Canyon Lake, the reason it made sense for Canyon Lake to take a chance on a guy who had never been a city manager before and had an unconventional background is that it was a small city that had trouble recruiting very experienced city managers, right? But they were facing some really serious budget challenges. In fact, I was told, if you get this job, you'll probably have it for about 3 years because we're going to have to declare bankruptcy, right? And they were at a point where
The other thing too is Canyon, it's not a full service city, correct?
contract city.
Yeah.
So now,
So that's another kind of hard to get. Sometimes that's hard to get city managers as well.
Yeah.
With that.
that's true. During my time there, we did start our own fire department, broke from the county.
Nice.
That's a whole other story.
Nice.
That was one of the ways we fixed the budget, right? But yeah, in a period of 2 years, we were able to turn that budget around from a huge deficit that was about to bankrupt the city to pretty significant surpluses. They are now approaching 100% reserves of their annual
Nice.
operating costs, right? Have their own fire department. We started programs there that generated revenue without increasing taxes. And it was just a tremendous experience. But for them, they wanted somebody who was familiar with government, but brought a different perspective, a private sector perspective, might be willing to take some risks that maybe someone who had been more seasoned in local government might not be willing to take, right? Right place at the right time, and it worked out for me.
That's awesome.
I was there for 4 years. It was a tremendous experience. I lived in Yucaipa at the time, so I was commuting,
Yeah, it's a drive.
an hour each way. So when I had the opportunity to come here to Yucaipa to manage the city where I live, it was
It's a no-brainer. Well, it's
It was a
Yucaipa.
no-brainer.
Yucaipa's a great city.
it is a phenomenal city. I can actually see my house from my office window. It's a little bit in the distance, but I can see it. So it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat.
Oh, sorry, I was going to drop a Palin. I can see Russia from it. Might be a little dated, but
Yeah, but no, it's been a great ride. I can't imagine doing anything else at this point in my career. I love it. It is not without its challenges.
well, you earlier you talked about fulfillment, and
Yeah.
I'll say I don't know how. I'm sure you can kind of echo this too, Will. But for me, I've never attained the highs, the emotional and just gratitude, like fulfilling highs of accomplishment
Mm.
in any other place like I have in city management. Now, they're few and far between, and because a lot of times you have these highs, and then just you go back to the daily grind of just of grinding stuff out as a manager. But when you can actually look at certain projects or things that you've done and you've had a tangible impact on, and say, "Oh yeah, I made a difference," that's it's unmatched really for me in any other pursuit.
I agree. No, and there are a lot of highs, but you talk about the daily grind. There are lows too, though, in
Yes.
this job, right? I mean, and there certainly are. And one of the things that I don't know if we're going to go back to the talking about the AAME, but one of the things that you talked about with that was really resonated with me as a support network for city managers, because
Yeah.
no matter how big or small of a city you're in, there's only one, and there's
Right.
nobody at that else at that level, and so. We've heard the tone, that it's a kind of a played out term, but lonely at the top. I mean,
Yeah.
it really resonates with in this profession. So
Yeah.
It really does.
Well, and when I first became a city manager, I just dove, all the way into the profession. I joined ICMA right away, went to the conferences, did the High Performance Leadership Academy. I mean, I just really dove in, but I did quickly find what you were describing, which is, while there are trainings that are offered, while there are conferences to network and some sessions given to be helpful, it is really not set up to be a nuts and bolts support for the city manager. Now, there is in California, the California City Management Foundation, which is a great organization, and they do some of that ICMA doesn't do. I've had great experiences with that organization, but on a national level, I think, Joe, you've really come upon something that's valid and of value in AME that there is a real need. I mean, obviously city managers aren't represented.
Right.
We're not members of unions. There's no one to protect city managers other than
The contract.
hopefully negotiating a good contract, which
Right.
is important. But as I go to conferences and I interact with city managers all over the country, I've realized that it's difficult to advocate for yourself sometimes,
It is. Yeah.
and
It's very awkward.
to negotiate for yourself, especially in public service, because we're talking about taxpayer resources. And when your contract comes up, and you're sitting there with the council, it's very difficult sometimes to advocate for, even if you know your value, the value you bring to the organization. That's a tough thing.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing with AME has a tremendous amount of potential to help city managers through situations like.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think the average person who's listening to this podcast, they might not understand is just how risky and volatile this profession is, because literally we can be fired, and, in California, I guess, with the Brown Act, 72-hour notice, I guess, essentially. And there's only one job that you can have in any city that you're in, right? Like, it's like, a lot of times the city managers have to move and uproot their family to go to their next position. And I think a lot of times the average person loses sight of the risk profile of this position. And oftentimes we are forced to shoulder all the blame and get very little of the credit when things are going right. In fact, I kind of going back, and this is maybe a little inside baseball, too much for this audience, but I think our profession is filled with individuals who want to make a difference. They want to do good. They want to be public servants. And so I think there's this very, sometimes, I don't know if it's a submissive sort of mindset or whatnot, but we can too often become doormats as opposed to standing up for ourselves and our worth and the value. I mean, and I say this as somebody who, again, who's a non-traditional entrant into the field, and I've had a complete sort of awakening on this whole issue of executive compensation, for example. I'm very candid. I said, before, I'm a conservative guy. I'm limited government, and I've been a classic critic of government my entire life, and I had the realization, it's like, well, who do you want to run your government? Do you want the people who are going to take the lowest pay, and basically, because that's the bottom of the barrel talent, or do you want to actually recruit and attract talented people who want to make a difference? And you've got to have some compensation. I mean, geez, you got, it's tough to live in California, right? I mean, even on a 6-figure salary for a lot of folks. And so it's like, at the end of the day, if you want to be fiscally conservative, which I'm all for, you still need to have talented people or talented leaders who can run an organization and extract those results on behalf of the taxpayers or the governing body. And that's where I've had just sort of this awakening, and personally. And that's where I kind of have, it's strange for me. I wrestle with some of this sometimes I wrestle with the idea of being a poser or a hypocrite, because for a long time I was very critical of executive compensation. And now, as you know, I'm one of the most staunch, hardcore advocates for fair compensation for executives, because I want the listener who just might be an average citizen who's just going about their business to understand that. What's your budget here in Yucaipa? I don't even know.
We're about 130 million all in, but that includes capital projects. So
130 million is a big organization,
right?
And we look at city manager, and man, I can go on a rant for days on this, but you look at city manager compensation, it can be pretty, depending on where you're at. It's it's okay. You make more money than the typical. Obviously, generally speaking, you're the highest paid individual in the organization, unless you got some situations with the overtime and public safety and what have you. But the individual who's sitting in the chair, the city manager chair, can have a huge impact, not just on the finances, but we're going to talk about finances right now, have a huge impact on the financial health of the organization. I talked to a city manager who, I won't name names, it's California city manager, who talked about how he arrived at a new organization and was able to basically stop a disastrous result from happening, probably saved the city about $30 million. And you're talking about an individual who's making $200,000 a year.
Right.
And it's like, if you had that performance in the private sector, your bonus compensation alone would be massive.
Right.
And so again, I'm all for fiscally prudent government. I'm all for fiscal conservatism, efficiency. I'm all for that. Trust me. But you also need to have talented people who are going to work in the organization to get the results that you need. And I think the issue to me, honestly, if I look at it, if I'm being as objective as I could be, it's not so much the compensation that is the issue. It's the public perception that the taxpayers are not getting their money's worth. And I think that if you can convey or show that you're delivering results for your taxpayers, then I think that becomes a more of a moot point. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it is. And you're right. You know, a comment that we all hear in the profession frequently from members of the public on social media is, well, this is how much money the city managers make. That's ridiculous. The average salary on this city is X.
Right.
But to your point, not everyone can just step into the role, right?
Right. Well, I'm going to step on that. I get that, right? Because I've made those arguments.
Yeah.
No one goes to the dentist and says, how come the dentist makes X amount per year? The average, income in the city is X, right? No one's compared to that, Again, the taxpayer needs to ask themselves, do you want your government to run efficiently? And if you don't think it's running efficiently, then that's a city council problem, right? Not a city manager problem, because the city manager is hired and fired by the council.
Right. And
so if you really want fiscally conservative, efficient government, then you need to vote that in, or whatever the case is that you want in your government. Because like I said, we work at the pleasure of the council.
Right. No, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about AME and are we a year in yet?
Nope, just started in June.
In June.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. 6 months in.
I haven't shared this publicly, but we're looking at when's this going to air? I don't know. Tomorrow?
No. This will air 2 weeks from today.
We're planning on having our first annual conference down in El Cajon, down outside of San Diego. So that will be
fantastic
in late June.
Okay.
We haven't announced it yet, but we've been working on it. We haven't finalized it yet exactly, but
it'll be an anniversary party.
It will literally be during the 1 year anniversary period of the founding member sign up. So
okay, very good.
Pretty excited about that. We're gonna have a very intimate affair. Not planning on having any vendors invited. It's gonna be limited capacity because obviously it's a first year doing it. So
that's great.
Yeah,
nice.
Pretty excited.
Well, that's great. What types of things are happening or are envisioned to happen with AME in terms of services to city managers programs?
Well, contract. We want to have want to do better on contract. First of all, not only on just the negotiating contracts, but the structuring of the contracts and the different provisions that are in. I'd like to do more work in terms of salary transparency and so forth and so on. So we can obviously have a better understanding of what compensation is and what the trends are. I see something, we've talked about advocacy. I won't get into that more than we've already talked about, but just, standing up for city managers and what have you. I see a lot of work I want to do on personal development in the area of personal finance. I think that's something that's sort of lacking because I think a lot of our city managers just think about, I have my pension, right? In California, I'm in CalPERS and maybe I have some deferred comp, but are we doing anything else besides that? I think that's something that needs to be kind of discussed in more detail.
Yeah.
And then big picture too, I'm also wanting to do more work. I don't know where this is going to go. This is just sort of we're in our infancy here, but I would like to see more work and influence on the GovTech space. I think I get a lot of feedback from managers who are annoyed and frustrated with the implementation issues and the perceived price gouging on annual renewals of government SaaS and what have you. So I think we need some more market transparency there and ways that we can maybe try to help managers and department heads get a better picture in that space. I'm not sure where that's going. I've had some preliminary discussions with somebody who's building a product and what have you. So a little into the weeds, obviously, for the sake of this audience, but the overall goal of AME in the grand scheme of things is to help city managers feel connected, have a sense of community, help develop them on a personal, professional level, advocate for them. But in the overall entirety, right, is to create more effective and skilled executives who then provide or transfer that value to the taxpayers, right, to the city that they work for. And that's what I want to do, right, is put city managers in a place to succeed, help them get wins, and obviously that's an end benefit for the taxpayers.
Fantastic. The three of us have something rather unique in common.
What's that?
Well, aside from all being in the city management profession, we all host podcasts,
Yes.
Yes.
right? which is, it leads me to something I'd like for the three of us to talk about, which is the changing nature of public communications, right? The world has changed. Used to be in government, you sent out press releases, then you sent out press releases and posted on Facebook, right? On your City Manager Unfiltered podcast back in August, you had a gentleman on by the name of Sam Tolles who talked extensively on this topic. I think it was a 2-part interview with Sam. Sam will actually be on our next episode.
Awesome.
He I don't know.
Gee, Chris, why is he in town?
Well, I was going to say I don't know who decided to hire him to do work for the city of Calimesa, but he's coming out to Calimesa next week, and so I'm taking advantage of thanks to I don't have to pay to fly him out here. He's already here. He's
the invoice will be in the mail.
Okay. All right. Great. I want to let you know, Will, I'm not going to be taking away from his time with Calimesa.
Right.
If he'll be coming after hours,
Yes.
then
Yes.
we'll record here. But look, everyone talks about transparency in local government. Everyone talks about better communication. You and I were talking at lunch about a very frustrating phenomenon that happens in every government agency where you have a project that's been in the pipeline for months or years, and you go through the entire process, and you've got the town hall meetings, and you've got the city council meetings, and finally it comes to the public hearing where there's going to be a vote. And inevitably, there are people that stand up and say, why is this moving so quickly? This is the first I've heard about this. I had no idea this was going on, right? And at some point, it is a citizen's responsibility to stay engaged if they are interested in knowing what's going on in their community.
100%.
But also, I do believe that local government has a responsibility to communicate effectively with residents in the ways that they are now receiving and digesting information, and that has changed from what it used to be years ago, right? Kudos to the three of us, I guess, for trying to adjust to the new reality of the way that people receive information. We've talked quite a bit about City Manager Unfiltered, but Will, what prompted you to start Calimesa Insider?
Well, I've always had an interest in the audio medium. So that goes back to my college days. I worked at the college radio station.
Yeah.
I actually did some play-by-play for Cal State Fullerton baseball, which was pretty cool because they were one of the best teams in the country.
Very cool.
So
It must have been the announcer.
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah, absolutely. And I did some play-by-play, some color, because I did play baseball in my high school days. So I've always had an interest in that field. So I've done podcasts in the past. I did a bowling podcast actually before podcasts were really a thing. This was back maybe 12 years ago or so. So I was kind of early into the game.
Professional bowling tour, or
a little bit of everything. So
Okay.
I had like the commissioner of the Professional Bowlers Association on and stuff like
who do
that.
you think you are?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Mr. Pete Weber. You still see that. I mean, you still see that in places,
Love it.
right? But yeah, so that was always kind of an interest in mine. So it was kind of a natural fit for me to bring that on. But the purpose that I have for the podcast is I'm trying to build kind of a library of the how and the why of government and what we do, because I think that, like you talked about with communication and how we need to engage the public more, but also I think it kind of goes back to a more fundamental thing where when we learn civics back in high school, and that's usually the extent of people's education and background into civics, they don't even touch local government. It's always focused on the federal government. You might get a little bit on state government, but local government's almost completely ignored. So, so that's why I think that, when we talk about transparency and putting, information out there and having a transparency portal, it's only so helpful if people actually understand the information that's out there, right? So to me, it's not just about giving them the information, but also giving the context of that information. So as I go along and as I build my podcast library, I can be able to point to people and say, why did we do it this way? Or why is this done in a certain way? I can say, hey, I actually talked about this if you want to learn more in this podcast episode. So that's kind of my purpose of doing it. It's the how and the why.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, one of the more challenging aspects of working in local government is combating the spread of misinformation over social media.
Mhm.
It's really become an epidemic. And it's eroding trust in local government. I think distrust in government is at an all-time high, largely due to social media, and it necessitates that we change our tactics. Right, we can't ban public discourse. Right, we can't censor what's nor should we.
Yeah.
What is put out over social media, but I do think we need to be putting the correct information out there, and how do we do that? Right? So, and there's no one answer. I think it's but we still have to do the traditional things. We have to send out the press releases, and we have to do the Facebook posts. But more and more people are getting their information from video, from long format podcasts, where you can really delve into an issue. Since we've started here, we've covered a pretty wide array of issues in our 7 episodes before today, and we've covered public safety, we've covered public works and road maintenance, we've covered ambulance service, we've been getting a really overwhelmingly positive response about people who take the time to watch or listen, and have said, "Look, I never knew it worked that way." It's a complicated issue, but this format gives us an opportunity to really delve into an issue and explain it in a way that you can't do in a quick soundbite.
Right.
So I'm optimistic that these formats will start to get the correct information out there and also build trust, because I think one of the reasons why this long form podcast has become so popular and successful, Joe Rogan, the most popular podcast in America, is his episodes are sometimes 3 hours long, right? I'm not suggesting we stay here for 3 hours today, but I do think that one of the reasons it's successful is that people get a sense of the individual, right? A sense of personality.
Not canned responses, right? There's not.
Right.
That's the problem with the way we get information now, right? On traditional, like say news or the talking head newscast or the talking heads on whether it's Fox, CNN, MSNBC, right? Everyone's got their canned. Because if you're allowed to speak for 30 seconds, everyone can get their canned memorized bite. But
right.
If you force somebody to speak for a longer period of time, then you kind of get a sense of what they're really about.
Right. No. So, for example, we have been having a long discussion today. People know that how Joe feels about the city of San Bernardino now.
That's right. It's a love-hate relationship.
That's right.
I think it was an all-American city back when I was born in 1977.
It is all-American city. Yes.
77, 78. I think it was 77.
Yeah.
It's been a few decades.
It has. I didn't mean to bring the conversation back
okay.
to the city of San Bernardino.
Past its glory days.
Well, there could be glory days in the future. You never know.
Let's hope.
Yeah. Let's hope. But no, I commend you guys for what you're doing. It's whenever you do something that's new, you open yourself up for criticism and for questioning, people asking why you're doing it or questioning whether it's the right thing to do.
Well, and here's the other thing too, and I mean, we live in a society now that's so, cancel culture this, and everyone wants to be insulted or offended by everything you say. So like the problem too is like if you go into a long form content like this, a podcast, you're invariably going to alienate somebody, or someone's going to perceive something you said wrong or incorrectly, or that what have you. And so I think in a lot of respects, and I think social media, you alluded to the pounding that a lot of public servants get on social media, is the environments become so toxic, right, and so pervasive that a lot of individuals in the public sector, they want to be more risk averse and just avoid even going that route because they don't want to suffer the slings and arrows that come that way. And I have a lot of feelings about social media too. You just said something a little bit earlier that I'm not sure I agree with or not, but some cities, more and more cities across the I saw it in Canada. I think I've seen some in America are starting to turn off comments on their social media because the comments are getting so toxic.
I actually talked about that on my last podcast episode. Yeah, I did.
I'm a big fan of that because I think that's BS I think that's BS community engagement. I think that's fake engagement. I think it's a sewer. And I say that as someone who used to be a social media bomb thrower myself, which again, put myself out being very intellectually honest here. I have a lot of feelings of hypocrisy or like, what did I do? Or I've made a penance or what have you, because I know how to stir up the masses on social media. But the reality is is usually your most engaged and intellectually honest and sincere individuals are not partaking in negative social media. They're busy, running their lives and taking their kids to do this and do that. And then I know this because I was a terrorist in chief on social media, that way too many elected officials put too much emphasis on a few comments that happen on social media, and they perceive that as being emblematic or representative of the population. And that's not true.
Right.
You and I know this firsthand from being in the game, right? It's very easy to spin up some people and put on tilt. Like, I used to enjoy it. Like, I used to like watching elected officials squirm because you could get a few people to say something. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm pulling the covers back a little bit.
Yeah.
But a lot of the social media engagement is not really healthy community engagement. It's destructive. It's not fair. And so I think cities should take a more aggressive approach when it comes to modulating that interaction, because there's plenty of healthy ways for the community to engage with their local government, whether it's at a city council meeting, other types of public meetings, through emails, through other, on-site visits, that kind of stuff. And I do think things like the podcast that you're doing, which, you guys are taking it to another level here in Yucaipa. I mean, I can't speak authoritatively on every podcast in California local government, but I think you guys are probably at the top when it comes to production value and putting time and energy into it. And I think that it's important that folks get that unfiltered, pun intended, message from the local government themselves, because historically speaking, it's always been filtered through mainstream media, right? Local media. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I mean, you don't have the ability to get your message out, especially with today's fractured environment. I mean, the media landscape's changed, right? So media resources are dwindling. There's so little time and energy for reporters. The truth be told, and I can't speak for Yucaipa market definitively, but I can speak as a macro sense, that in many respects, local media outlets have become a lot of plug and play, just, print the press release and kind of turns it into a quasi sort of article when it's really not, 'cause they don't have the resources.
Right.
But you can't really get into how many times have you clicked on a TV news station website and read a news article, and it's like one paragraph or two paragraphs and you get next to nothing from that article, right?
Yeah.
And so the people need ways to get real information, but how do they do it? Nowadays, you go to social media, even if you support social media used to be great back in, 15 years ago, right? When you could put your message out there and we had almost 100% organic reach, because people back when the algorithms weren't trying to get all the ad dollars, right? You could sign up to be the Yucaipa page, and whatever Yucaipa posted, you would get in your feed.
Right.
Now it's your organic audience is 2% or whatever the case might be. So how are we getting information out to the public? Podcast is one of those ways. The problem with podcasts and the difficulty with podcasts is that it doesn't have a natural content discovery mechanism, you know? And so unless you're looking for it proactively on your own, it's going to be very difficult to find.
Right.
And so one of the struggles I think local governments are going to have is, okay, it's one thing to do the podcast and get the information produced and created, but how are you what's your distribution model?
Right. That's something that we've spent some time trying to figure out as well, and there's no one right answer. One of the things we're doing is you may have an hour and a half podcast, but there are a lot of different topics that are covered, and a lot of people aren't going to sit down and watch an hour and a half.
That's
of
correct.
a podcast.
Splice it up.
Yeah, so we cut it up, and there are AI driven programs that help with this now, and there's one that we use that you load up the whole video, and it uses AI to analyze what it thinks are the little segments that are most likely to go viral, right? In my mind, that means the most likely to actually be interesting to people, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it will prepare those for you, and even put up the transcript in colorful words, and that we've gotten a lot of hits off of that, a lot of success with that. We'll take we know people are really interested in this topic, so we'll push that out, and it may be a 5-minute clip. And people will watch that. And then if people are interested in that, they may click on the link to the full episode.
Right.
Right. But you're right. That is a challenge. You said something that really resonated with me when we were talking about how the comments on social media are not necessarily representative of the community's sentiments. And yet there's a danger that elected officials will put too much weight into those comments. And that is very common. And not only that, but it impacts city staff and their perceptions of what the community is looking for, and their perception of how the community feels about them and the work they're doing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's important that we find ways to combat that. I don't know if turning comments off is the right mechanism. It's interesting. I'll be curious to see how that debate unfolds. But I agree that comments on social media are not a productive and healthy form of public discourse. There are many other ways.
But why is that? I think a lot of that's because of a lot of the anonymity factor. One, I getting off in the weeds here. I've been on LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn's basically my social media platform of choice and exclusive use. And I would venture to say that if you were to put all your content, move it from say Facebook to LinkedIn, you would have a completely different experience.
Agreed.
And I think because what happens is if you're on LinkedIn, more often than not, you're going to have a business, a professional image, right? And there's a consequence there. You're not in this little bubble, it's like the car rage syndrome, right? Everyone can get car rage when, a road rage in the car because they're stuck behind this, in this box and they're protected or cocoon. It's not real life. You know what I mean? But you get like LinkedIn, for example, and you have to watch your professional reputation. I think there's a different level of interaction, it's just a higher level to me. So I think a lot of it has to do with an anonymity, right? And I think a lot of it, deep down, when it comes down to social media and the visceral nature of it is a lot of people are angry and frustrated for a variety of reasons in life. I'm not going to get any political diatribe on it. And a lot of us fall victim to our baser emotions, and it's easy to just fire off bombs on social media.
It's interesting you brought up LinkedIn in that context because I won't mention any names, but I actually had an experience with that during my tenure here in Calimesa. And so we had a bomb thrower on our social media page that was frequently commenting on things and was really negative. And so I looked them up. I just did some research on an off weekend or something like that. It's like I just want to look more into this person and kind of try to understand who they are and why maybe they're doing this. And I came across their LinkedIn profile. I clicked on it. The next day, he's posting mine on saying the city manager's spying on me, and posting. Here's his LinkedIn to So it's like,
well, you hit a note on that.
By her nerve, right? Yeah, exactly. Because now his anonymity was not there as much, right? So
you're clearly not a premium member, or you could have viewed his page anonymously.
Yes, I know.
Neither am I. I don't know. It's a challenge that cities everywhere are grappling with, how to deal with this brave new world of social media and public service.
Well, and just the fragmentation in general of how we get and consume our media and information. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, our parents' generation, they had 3 channels, you know what I mean? And now it's like you have 3,000 channels, different mediums, It's insane.
And we, you mentioned Sam Tolles earlier. I mean, so the reason he's in town is we engaged him to come and help us out with our social media outreach. We have and I talk about this a lot on Calimesa Insider, how we have a small but mighty staff at Calimesa. And so, the person that I have running social media, she does that in addition to, lots of other jobs. And so one of the things that I'm looking forward to is having Sam help us empower other members of staff to be able to contribute to that, to increase, tell our story and increase our engagement with the, and the end result will be further engagement with the community and more effective engagement with the community and catching them where they are. And so that to me provides a lot of value to the taxpayer. And that's why I think it's a good investment in our taxpayer dollars to bring them in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, guys, this has been great. I really appreciate you being here. Will, our communities, our neighbors, we should make a habit of this, and lots of issues of mutual interest between Calimesa and Yucaipa, and
absolutely,
we should make a point of getting together and getting information out together on the broader community, I think. And Joe, really an honor to have you here.
Thank you, bud.
Appreciate all the work you're doing with AAME and with the podcast, and whether it was your intent or not, you have kind of become therapy for a lot of people in the in the city management.
True words have never been spoken.
So we appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of us.
That was an unintended consequence for sure.
Well, it's much appreciated. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to have a trip down memory lane. It's been a while since I've been in the IE, and it's kind of nice to be home again. So.
Yeah, well, nice to have you here. Welcome here anytime. So episode number 9 will drop in 2 weeks on Tuesday, December 31st. Until then, we hope everyone has a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and you take some time during the holidays to relax and enjoy spending time with your loved ones. Thank you for watching and listening to Yucaipa 360.
City managers making spirits bright, from Yucaipa to Calimesa light. With the American Association by our side, we keep the cities full of pride. The Yucaipa looks bright. Potholes filled and the streets are clear, thanks to city teams bringing cheer. Holiday parades line the avenue, all planned out for me and you. City managers making spirits bright, from Yucaipa to Calimesa light. With the American Association by our side, we keep the cities full of pride. From Yucaipa till it's bright. Budget plans and festive light stands, snowy nights give us a chance to show our town we've got it all, from civic pride to a grand ball. Calimesa is twinkling all around, city planners never let us down. From grand approvals to holiday flights, they work hard through frosty nights. The new capital is bright. The new capital is bright. Potholes filled and streets are clear, thanks to city teams bringing cheer. Holiday parades line the avenue, all planned out for me and you. City managers making spirits bright, from Yucaipa to Calimesa light. With the American Association by our side, we keep the cities full of pride.